The woman at the door was not who Warren Slade expected to find at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. He had driven 40 minutes across the city in the rain, with a stranger in his back seat. A young woman who had given him a street corner instead of an address, and who had fallen asleep somewhere on the gardener with her cheek pressed against the window. He had figured out the rest by going through her phone, finding a contact labeled Mom, call if dead, which struck him as both practical and a little sad. The mother had answered on the second ring, her voice already awake, already worried in the particular way of someone who had been waiting without admitting it. She had opened the door before he could knock, and the reason Warren recognized her was that her photograph had been sitting in his email inbox for 3 days. Lorraine Beckett, new executive director of Halcyon Transit Solutions, effective the 1st of the month. He had read the announcement twice, the way he read most things, once for the information, once to decide how he felt about it. He had not yet decided. She was looking at him the way people looked at Warren when they were trying to figure out whether to be afraid or relieved. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, the kind of build that read as either reassuring or threatening depending on your mood. He was wearing the same canvas work jacket he wore every day, the one with the frayed left cuff and the Halcyon Fleet Maintenance badge still clipped to the breast pocket from his shift. He had not thought to take it off. "She's fine," he said first, because that was what mattered. She was at the Ossington bar on King. She needed a ride, and she didn't know where she was going. "So she called you." Lorraine Beckett looked past him to the car, where her daughter was visible through the back window, listing slightly to the left. "I'll carry her in," Warren said. "If that's all right." Lorraine nodded once, stepped back from the door and watched him do it. Her name was Tatum Beckett. She was 24, and she smelled like a mojito in someone else's perfume, and she weighed approximately nothing, which made Warren feel even more like a man who had wandered into the wrong story. He settled her on the couch in the front room while Lorraine brought a glass of water and a blanket, and then they stood in the hallway not quite looking at each other. "You work for Halcyon," Lorraine said. It wasn't a question. She had seen the badge. Fleet maintenance. Night dispatch supervisor. She absorbed that. How long? 11 years. He watched her run that number through whatever calculation she was performing. He had gotten used to people doing math on him, trying to figure out how a man who looked like Warren, who drove a 2009 Civic with a cracked dashboard and wore boots from the clearance rack at Mark's, had been in the same place for 11 years and still showed up at midnight to carry a stranger's daughter into her house without being asked for anything in return. The answer, if anyone had thought to ask him, was simple. It was just what you did. "Can I make you a coffee?" Lorraine said. "No, thank you. I've got an early start. At least let me." "She's okay," Warren said again. That's enough. He drove home in the rain and didn't think about it again until Thursday morning, when he walked into the monthly operations briefing and found Lorraine Beckett sitting at the head of the table. Warren Slade had been invisible at Halcyon for a long time, and he had mostly made peace with that. Not invisible the way some men were, not overlooked through carelessness or bad luck. Warren was invisible because he had made himself that way, steadily and with intention, over the course of a decade. He did not speak at meetings unless spoken to. He did not attend the staff socials at the Keg on Wellington or the retirement parties at the conference room down the hall. He came in, he did his work, he went home. His work, for what it was worth, was exceptional. The fleet he supervised had the lowest mechanical failure rate in the company's Ontario division. His scheduling logs were clean. In 11 years, he had filed one complaint, a noise issue with the HVAC in the dispatch bay, and it had been fixed within the week because the complaint was 4 sentences long and included a photograph, a timestamp, and a cost estimate for ignoring it. Nobody had promoted him. This was not, as far as Warren could tell, because of any deficiency in his performance. His annual reviews were strong, consistently rated in the top tier of his department. The issue was subtler and harder to name. His manager, a man named Cliff Dubois, who wore quarter-zip sweaters and talked about metrics in a voice that suggested he had recently attended a seminar on talking about metrics, had told Warren 3 years ago that he lacked executive presence. Warren had written that phrase down in the small notebook he kept in his jacket pocket. He looked at it sometimes when he was trying to understand something about the world. He had a daughter. Her name was Piper, and she was 9 years old, and she lived with Warren's mother on Tuesdays and Thursdays while he worked nights, because Warren's ex-wife had moved to Kelowna 2 years ago, and that was just how things had ended up. Piper had a gap between her front teeth and an opinion about every book she read, and a habit of narrating the world around her in the third person, which Warren found both baffling and deeply familiar. She got it from him, his mother said. He had done the same thing as a child. He had just eventually stopped saying the narration out loud. On Thursday nights, he picked Piper up from his mother's house on Roncesvalles, and they stopped at the chip truck on the way home if it wasn't too cold, and they ate in the car, and she told him about her week in enormous detail. And Warren listened and asked questions and felt, during those 30 minutes, that the rest of his life was arranged correctly around a single clear point. He did not talk about this at work. He did not talk about much of anything at work. Lorraine Beckett ran meetings the way certain people drove, efficiently and slightly faster than you expected. She had taken the director role after Halcyon's previous executive, a man named Jeff Carmichael, who'd had a talent for expensive consultants and vague strategic pivots, had left abruptly in October under circumstances that were described in the internal announcement as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities. Lorraine had come from the Calgary office, where she had overseen a regional restructuring that had, depending on who you asked, either saved the division or gutted it, or both. She did not introduce herself at the Thursday briefing. She assumed they knew who she was, and she was right. She asked 3 questions in the first 10 minutes, and all 3 landed in the room like rocks in still water, producing ripples that nobody quite recovered from before the next one arrived. The third question was directed at Cliff Dubois. It was about the Q3 fleet variance report, specifically why a particular failure metric had been flagged in 2 consecutive quarters without any documented response from operations management. Cliff cleared his throat. He mentioned bandwidth. He mentioned the transition period. He mentioned a cross-departmental initiative that Warren had never heard of, delivered in the confident tone of a man describing something that did not exist. Lorraine wrote something down. She looked up. She moved on. After the meeting, she stopped Warren in the hallway. "The Q3 variance," she said. "The Brampton hub numbers. Do you know what caused the spike?" Warren looked at her steadily. "Yes, when did you know?" "August." She was quiet for a moment. "Was it reported?" "I filed a maintenance deviation log." "It went to Cliff in September." He paused. "I have the submission receipt." Lorraine studied him for a long moment. She had, he noticed, the same quality her daughter had. Something around the eyes that suggested she was listening more carefully than she appeared to be. "Good to know," she said, and walked away. Word got around. Word always got around. The story that circulated was partial and slightly wrong, as office stories always were. What people knew was that Warren Slade, Big Quiet Warren from Nights, the one who never came to Christmas lunch, had apparently done something for the new director's family. What they knew was that Lorraine had stopped him in the hallway. What they knew was that Cliff Dubois had spent 45 minutes behind a closed door with HR on Friday afternoon. What they decided, from these facts, was that Warren was positioning himself, that he had seen an opportunity and moved on it, that his niceness was a kind of strategy. A man named Dennis Frayne, who supervised the Mississauga hub and had the social confidence of someone who had never once questioned whether he was the most interesting person in a room, said as much in the break room on Monday. He did not lower his voice when Warren walked in. He did not seem to register that Warren had walked in at all. Warren poured his coffee. He nodded at the 2 other people in the room, Annette from billing, who looked uncomfortable, and someone from E whose name he didn't know. He left without saying anything. He was not by nature a man who said things. He was a man who remembered them. Piper had a school concert on the following Thursday. It was the kind of thing that was described in the event notice as a winter celebration, and it was held in the gymnasium at Fern Avenue, and the children sat on risers and sang 4 songs with varying degrees of accuracy and enormous collective conviction. Piper was in the second row. She was wearing a red sweater, and her hair was in 2 braids that Warren had done himself that morning, which had taken considerably longer than either of them had planned for. He sat in the 3rd row of folding chairs and watched his daughter sing. She was not the loudest voice and not the most on key, but she sang with her whole body, the way she did most things, leaning slightly forward as though trying to get somewhere faster. Warren's mother sat beside him and cried a little, discreetly, the way she did at all of Piper's concerts, which Piper found both embarrassing and privately gratifying. He did not think about Halcyon. He did not think about Lorraine or Cliff or the deviation log or Dennis Frayne in the break room. He thought about his daughter and the red sweater and the way the gymnasium smelled like floor wax and children, and the particular brand of quiet hope that collected in rooms full of parents watching their kids do something ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. He took a photograph. He was not good at photography. The photograph was slightly blurred and Piper's eyes were half closed. He kept it anyway. The email from HR came on a Wednesday 3 weeks after the Thursday meeting. It requested a brief conversation at your earliest convenience, which in Warren's experience meant something had been decided and he was being informed. He replied with his availability and went back to the dispatch board and did not spend the next 48 hours wondering about it, or at least did not spend more time wondering about it than was reasonable. The HR conversation was brief. It was conducted by a woman named Beth Owusu, who had a very tidy desk and a habit of framing bad news as if it were a geography lesson. The topic was the deviation log, specifically the question of why Warren had not escalated beyond Cliff when the September submission went without response. "I submitted through proper channels," Warren said. "Of course, we understand that. It's more a question of," Beth paused, "of whether there were other avenues you might have considered." Warren looked at her. "I could have gone over Cliff's head. That's certainly one way to." "I didn't, because I wasn't sure I was reading the situation correctly. I documented my concern and I submitted it, and I kept my copy." He placed the deviation log on her desk. He had brought a printed copy. He had also brought the email confirmation of the digital submission and the follow-up he had sent in October when no response had come. "I kept all of it." Beth looked at the papers. She looked at Warren. Something passed across her face that was not quite surprise. "I see," she said. "Thank you." Warren picked up his copy of the documents, left her copy on the desk, and went back to work. He drove Piper to school the next morning and stopped, as they sometimes did, at the Tim Hortons on King for a hot chocolate, which Piper considered a significant event and treated accordingly. She was telling him about a book she was reading, something about a girl who discovered she could talk to birds, which Piper described as realistic except for the bird part. When his phone buzzed twice in succession, he glanced at it at a red light. 2 messages. The first was from a number he didn't have saved, which turned out to be Tatum Beckett, saying, "Heard you work at my mom's company. That's extremely weird. Hope you're okay. She can be a lot." The second was from Lorraine. He read the first one with something close to amusement. He read the second one twice. "I'd like to meet when you have time. Not HR, just us. LB Dad," Piper said, the light. He put his phone in his pocket and drove. They met at a coffee shop on Queen West, which was Lorraine's choice, and which was not the kind of place Warren usually went. Small, loud, the kind of furniture that looked like it had been sourced from several different decades without apologizing for it. He arrived first. He ordered a regular coffee and took a table by the window and watched the street. Lorraine arrived 12 minutes late and did not apologize for it, which he found he respected. "I've been reading your file," she said, sitting down without taking off her coat. "All right, you've had strong performance reviews for 11 years. You haven't been promoted once." She said it the way she said everything, directly, without editorializing, as though she were reading coordinates off a map. "Tell me why." Warren looked at her. "You have the file. What does the file say?" "The file says lacks executive presence, which is not an answer." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." She waited. He considered. "I don't work the way that phrase expects me to," he said finally. "I don't talk in meetings unless I have something to say. I don't go to the events. I don't manage upward. I do the work and I document the work and I go home." He paused. "I've had a daughter to get home to." Lorraine wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She was quiet for a moment in a way that felt like thinking rather than uncertainty. "Tatum told me what you did," she said. She pieced it together from her phone. She was embarrassed. "She shouldn't be. I know, I told her that." A brief pause. "She also said you didn't ask for anything." There was nothing to ask for. Most people would have. Warren looked out the window. A streetcar went by, the kind that rattled slightly on the curve at the intersection, the same rattle he had been hearing from that corner for 20 years. I don't think most people are actually like that, he says odd. I think it just looks that way from certain angles. Lorraine studied him for a long moment. I'm restructuring the operations division, she said. There's going to be a regional coordination role. It doesn't exist yet on paper. It will. She picked up her coffee. I'm not offering you anything. I'm telling you that role will be posted, and I think you should apply, and I think you should apply as yourself without trying to have executive presence. Warren was quiet. I'm not doing you a favor, she added, and the slight edge in her voice made it clear she had anticipated that interpretation. The Brampton failure cost us $80,000 in Q4 penalties. You flagged it in August. I want people in positions where the information goes somewhere useful. All right, Warren said. That's it? All right. What else would you like me to say? She almost smiled. It was a small thing, quickly controlled. Nothing, probably. He did not tell anyone about the conversation. He went back to nights, to the dispatch board and the fleet logs, and the familiar machinery of a job he had done long enough that he could read its rhythms, the way you read a person's breathing. Knowing before the numbers changed what was about to happen. Knowing which hub would call in with a problem before the call came. Cliff Dubois left the company in January. The announcement described it as a transition. Warren read it the way he read most things. The role was posted in February. Warren applied the way he did everything. Carefully, without embellishment, with documentation attached for every claim he made. His application was 9 pages, the cover letter was 4 sentences. There were 6 candidates. He met with a panel of 3, including Beth Owusu, who gave no indication that they had met before, and a man from the Calgary office whom Warren had never seen, and Lorraine, who sat at the end of the table and asked 2 questions and said nothing else. He drove home after the interview and picked up Piper from his mother's, and they stopped at the chip truck because it was a Thursday, and it wasn't too cold, and she told him about a disagreement she had with her best friend about whether dogs dreamed, and he told her the scientific consensus, which was that they probably did, and she said that was sad and good at the same time, and he said yes, he thought so too. He did not hear anything for 9 days. The call came on a Tuesday morning. While he was in the dispatch bay going over the overnight logs with his second-in-command, a young woman named Soren, who was 26 and relentlessly competent, and who Warren had spent 2 years quietly teaching everything he knew without either of them discussing that this was what was happening. He stepped out to take it. He stood in the hallway beside the fire door with the draft coming under it and listened. He said very little. He said thank you. He ended the call and stood there for a moment with his hand on the cold metal bar of the door. Then he went back in and told Soren that she was going to be running the overnight solo starting in March, and that she was ready, and that he would make sure the transition was documented properly so she had everything she needed. She looked at him for a long moment. Did you get it? Yes. She didn't make a fuss. She was not a fuss-making person, which was one of the reasons he had spent 2 years making sure she knew what she was doing. She just nodded and turned back to the logs and said, "Okay, walk me through the Etobicoke routing again." He did. The night before his first day in the new role, Warren sat in the kitchen after Piper was asleep and drank a cup of tea and didn't do anything in particular. The apartment was quiet in the way it was usually quiet, a specific quiet, the kind that had been built up over years of living alone in a small space and learning to move through it without making noise, because there was a child sleeping, and because noise felt like it cost something he wasn't sure how to spare. He thought about Lorraine saying, "I'm not doing you a favor," and the particular care she had taken to make that clear, which was itself a kind of care he recognized. He thought about Tatum's text, which he had not replied to, and then had 3 days later with, "Things are fine. Good luck with whatever comes next." She had replied with a single thumbs up, and he had found this adequate. He thought about Cliff Dubois and executive presence, and the notebook where he had written it down. He took the notebook out of his jacket pocket. He looked at the phrase. He thought about the 9-page application and the 4-sentence cover letter, and the way Beth Owusu had looked at the stack of documentation he placed on her desk. Not surprised, exactly. More like someone recognizing something they had not been expecting to see. He closed the notebook. He put it on the table. He thought he might not need to look at it again, but he kept it anyway. You kept things that had taught you something, even after the lesson was finished. That was just how it worked. Piper had left her library book on the kitchen counter. The Girl Who Talked to Birds. He picked it up and read the back, and then read the first 2 pages, which was all he had time for before his eyes started to close. He set it down carefully so he didn't lose her place, even though there was no bookmark, and he didn't know where her place was. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. Tomorrow would be the first day of something, and he was, as always, ready for it in the particular way of a man who did not announce his readiness, who simply showed up, documented, and did the work. That had always been enough. It turned out it still was.